Hello everyone, and welcome to another socially distanced video Dvar Torah. I don't know if anyone is still keeping track out there, but it's been about 15 weeks since we Canadians locked ourselves in our igloos and built an ice wall along the US border. It kind of reminds me of Game of Thrones, where Canadians are the free folk, just so long as we protect ourselves from all of the COVID-19 White Walkers who refuse to wear a mask at the grocery store. Put on a mask! You're gonna get us all killed, Greg! Oh, he touched the avocado and put it back. Which one did he touch? Did you see which one? At least during our social isolation, the news cycles have been keeping us at the edge of our seats. From the comedy that is the U.S. elections with the latest Donald Trump gaffe, to the sublime and meaningful discussions on racism that are now taking center stage both in the news and in our communities. I can say that for me personally, it's been an absolute enlightening experience to engage in these conversations with some of you all in our shul's daily virtual social hall. But one of the highlights from my week was being one of the 7,000 virtual attendees in an online Kabbalat Shabbat ceremony led by two rabbis who also happened to be female LGBTQ Jews of color in honor of Juneteenth, the commemoration of the date in 1865 that the proclamation of the abolition of slavery finally reached the last African Americans in Texas 2.5 years after it was signed into law by Abraham Lincoln. The event was hosted by Bechol Lashon, an organization whose mission is to strengthen Jewish identity by raising awareness about the ethnic, racial, and cultural diversity of Jewish identity and experience. With so much of our mental energy going into keeping ourselves safe, as we slowly start venturing out into this brave and strange new world of plexiglass shields at checkout counters and bottles of hand sanitizer becoming a new form of currency, Israel has seemed, for the most part, to stay out of the front page news. It's a good thing. After all, no news is good news. But to be honest, it has me a bit worried. Back in November, I wrote an article expressing my hesitation over the U.S. announcement that it would no longer consider the Israeli settlements as illegal. I was torn between the victory for the legitimacy of Israeli sovereignty on the one hand versus my worries that this was the beginning of a slippery slope that could ultimately lead to the end of the two-state solution and a dystopian situation in which an absorbed Palestinian population would become a non-voting minority within Israel, a situation which would frighteningly validate the currently very incorrect claim that Israel is an apartheid state. Let me be very clear about my thoughts on this. I stand 100% with Israel, and I absolutely defend Israel's right to take appropriate action to ensure its security, as is any country, and this is precisely why I believe in a two-state solution. With an Israeli state alongside a Palestinian state, with clear and well-defined borders, each country should ultimately have the right to determine its own future independent of the other. This stands in contrast to the one-state solution, in which Israel absorbs the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and other disputed territories, and does not give Palestinians who live there the right to be Israeli citizens, with the power to vote for representatives in the Israeli government. As Donald Trump's polling numbers decline, making his re-election looking less and less likely, it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is considering plans to annex part of the West Bank before the enabling president leaves the White House. This action would take Israel a significant step closer to the one-state solution. If we could go to shul this week, we would be reading Parshat Korach. In the story, a man by the name of Korach, who also happens to be Moses' first cousin, challenges Moses and Aaron for leadership of the Israelite nation. he gathers together 250 men of renown, and as a show of support, accuses Moses of hoarding power, saying, "The entire congregation is holy, and the Lord is in their midst, so why do you raise yourselves above God's assembly?" In response, Moses proposes a test whereby they would each prepare an incense offering for the tabernacle and see whom God chooses to lead. Before the assembled community, God makes it clear that Korach and his followers are in the wrong as the earth splits open and consumes them all. While it is clear from the tone of the language in the Torah that Korach and his followers were behaving disrespectfully to Moses and Aaron, there is no apparent problem with Korach's fundamental argument inherent within the Torah text. Would it have really been so bad if Moses and Aaron had at least shared some of their administrative powers with a few other leaders that clearly have the confidence of many Israelites? It was problem enough for our sages to make it clear in their commentaries that although it's not explicitly stated, we are to interpret that Korach's sin that led to his death was that his desire for power was not out of altruistic intentions, but rather out of jealousy, lust, and personal gain. For this, he and his followers were destroyed. I will admit that even with this explanation, I'm still very bothered by the story. Of course, there are malicious dictators and oligarchs in our world today who certainly seem to operate purely out of self-interest, and that's wrong. But even those leaders whom we respect for having honest intentions to lead for the greater good, can we really admonish them for having a small amount of lust for power too? If I look at myself, I honestly believe that the things that I do as a spiritual leader for our synagogue community are done for the betterment of Beth Radom and its members. But as long as I'm being honest, I also enjoy the spotlight. There are 100 things that I could do for our community, but I want to get up on a bima and sing. I like being on camera and sending my messages out into the world. I hope that's not wrong of me. Our world today is doing a great deal of introspection and soul-searching. For many of us still sitting at home avoiding contact with humanity, there isn't a whole lot else to do. It's taken a global pandemic for us to stop working for a living and ask ourselves whether our living is working. What ought we be doing differently with our lives? When will we finally get around to doing that thing we always said we were going to do? We're also learning to take a deep look within ourselves with regards to racism, learning about things like microaggression, systemic barriers, and colonization, so that we can live in a more socially conscious way and take care of our fellow human beings here on Earth. My final thought, however, turns back to Israel. I don't have a solution to Middle East peace. I know that with a one-state solution, we as Jews are in danger of becoming exactly that which the rest of the world wants to hate us for, the apartheid state that subjugates an ethnic minority. But with a two-state solution, we leave ourselves vulnerable to sustained attacks by a group who has publicly declared their commitment to our complete annihilation. And we can't do nothing, because if there's one thing that everybody seems to agree on, it's that the status quo simply can't be sustained indefinitely. As it says in Pirkei Avot, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, who am I? And if not now, when? So what do? We take stock in ourselves, ask each other the tough questions, understand our motivations and their consequences, and also recognize that we do not live in a world of black and white where there is always a clearly defined line between good and evil. And with that, we carefully move forward and hope for a better future. Shabbat Shalom.